Okay, so for the first part of this mug project, we're going to talk a little bit about mugs. And in the previous clip, we looked at the parts of a mug that make up the basic shape and function. And I've brought out some mugs from my collection here. Two in the front are commercially made cups made with industrial process, and these two in the back are both handmade, made on the pottery wheel, and have kind of a similar shape, a little bit of a different aesthetic. Let's talk a little bit about why mugs look the way that they look. So these two commercially made mugs have kind of a similar aesthetic. They have a very wide fat handle here, a nice rounded lip here. This one has a nice fat handle, and these are made with a mold process. So they're made completely by machine with liquid clay that pours into a shape, kind of like the way you make chocolate Easter bunnies. And when the mold is pulled away, then you're left with the mug. So this one also has a very nice lip, kind of reaches out a little bit towards the user. Okay. They're both quite thick, but with an industrial process, you can also get pretty thin. The thicker the material, the more insulated it's going to be. So if you have a thinner piece like a teacup, that's going to cool your liquid off faster because the heat is going to evaporate through the thin surface of an eggshell thin porcelain. So for a thicker mug, it's going to insulate your drink a little more. Okay, so this is a really nice mug. We've got our belly, we've got our lip, we've got our foot, we've got our handle. This is made by a pottery teacher in Richmond by the name of Kay Coffee. It's one of my favorite mugs in the collection, and her name is really Coffee, Kay Coffee. Very beautiful. And the nice thing about this shape is that it's got this exterior belly that holds the bulk of the liquid. And then it kind of keeps the heat in by having the section that tapers in a little bit more. And that just kind of keeps the steam and the warmth collected in the belly of the cup there. So let's look at the lip. It's still really nice and rounded. And the reason you want a really nice transition or a round lip on your mug is for the texture when you're drinking on it. So mugs and cups are one of the few things that we are going to make in ceramics where you're going to interact with it with your face, basically. So you want to make sure that anything that you make has something that's not very rough or squared off or has a lot of edges on there or little bits that stick out or a lot of grog that pops out from the surface. Because any of those that have any kind of sharp or textured edge on there, that will be really rough on your mouth when you're trying to drink out of it. And also, things that are too thin or too sharp at the top can be likely to chip, and they also are kind of unpleasant to drink out of. And if it's too thin, it can even dribble a little bit because it doesn't really hold the liquid in there while you're drinking out of it. This is a mug made by my friend Jules de Ballancourt. I went to school with him at CCAC, now CCA. And this is really beautiful. It's got a street scene from Oakland on there. He's a really accomplished painter. You can find him on Instagram, really beautiful. This is more of a low fire mug. It's still functional. It's kind of on the bottom end of what you can use as a functional mug. You can see over the years it's gotten a little crazed inside. You can see a little crackle with coffee in there. That's because the glaze was a lower fire, and so it doesn't stand up to the thermal shock of a hot liquid in there as much as something like Kay's, which is a cone 10 high fire glaze, really good surface on there. And the clay has been vitrified, so that means that it's the top end of its firing range, and the particles have compacted down almost as far as they can go, and it's like cement. So, let's see if we can go on Jules. He had to actually glaze the bottom to make sure that this would not leak. So that's something we can't do in this class. So the mugs that we make are going to be higher fire. That means They're going to be vitrified on the bottom, and we don't need to glaze them on the bottom because that will hold the liquid without having it seep. If you have something that's low fire and you did not vitrify it or glaze it on the bottom, and you have hot liquid, you'll notice if it sits on a surface, you have liquid in there, the liquid will actually, via the capillary effect, will kind of seep through your clay and drip out on whatever surface it's sitting on. So with mugs, you generally want them to be high fire using the process that we're going to use in this class because we cannot glaze on the bottom of our pieces. Okay. So for our higher fire piece, you can hear this little ding. This is porcelain. It's a porcelain slip. Okay, so higher fire is generally good for hotter temperature liquids because that will withstand the sudden change of temperature when you put a hot liquid in there. Also, a thicker mug will also withstand thermal shock. You don't want them too thick though, because after you put liquid in there, it's going to add to the weight of the mug. So if you have a mug that's super thick, we can't fire anything that's over ½ an inch in this class, or else it will be rejected for firing. But the other reason is you have a big mug, you make it really thick, ½ an inch, you put liquid in there, it's gonna really weigh on your hand there. So that's something that you don't really want. So the other nice thing about these mugs, you can look at them, they have space for your fingers when you're holding the mug. This one's just kind of on the bottom range of what you want there. So if I had a really hot liquid in there and it was sort of radiating to the surface of the mug here, if your fingers are too close to the inside of the mug there, you can burn your fingers. So you want to be mindful when you're making a handle, perhaps, not to criticize Jules, but perhaps another ¼ inch on there would have given a little more clearance for the fingers. Otherwise, you need to be really careful. On Kay's Master Potter, she's got enough clearance for your fingers there. It's a nice balanced shape. It's not too big, it's not too small. And you also notice that she has it, even though it's right flush with the lip here, it doesn't rise above the surface of the lip there. And that's a good place to A, to put your thumb, but B, also it means that you won't knock against this and have it, it's more vulnerable to chipping or breaking if it's above the surface of your lip. Also, it can kind of over pour. Also, if you store your mugs upside down, it's just more practical to have a handle that's not going to be rocking the mug surface back and forth. Okay. So this one, pretty good size and shape, a little lower down. Not all the way at the bottom there, because you can run into the same problem where if the handle sticks out below the bottom rim of your foot there, that can rock your piece back and forth. It can also be really tricky to glaze this piece if it's near the place where you need to keep it free of glaze, because then you have to have a bald spot on the bottom of your handle. So just kind of be mindful of placement. This has a really nice curve, goes with the curves of the mug really well. This is one of my favorite commercial mugs. Okay, so another reason you don't want to have too thin of a lip here, and Kay's is probably probably as thin as you want to get here, is when you glaze these, you want to make sure there's enough surface area on the top here that glaze will adhere to that. And we're going to talk a little more about glazing, but you can see here these drips on her glaze. This means that during firing, the gravity and the heat pulls the glaze downwards a little bit. So that's why she left a space at the bottom here, because that will give the glaze a margin of error. If it drips down, it won't drip all the way down and adhere to the bottom of the mug or the kiln shelf. But you also want to make sure, because the glaze is dripping down, it's going to pull a little bit from the glaze on the rim here. So you want to make sure that you don't have something that's too pointy, or else the glaze just kind of runs right down the sides. So having a bit of a shelf here will give the glaze something to sit on. So you have a nice surface, good mouthfeel for when you're drinking out of it. Okay, so all of these have a really good lip on there. Really nice shape on Jules. He altered it a little bit from working on it on the wheel. And this is probably as thick as you want to get. I like to do this rim a little bit on my hand-thrown teacups, so I really like this shape here. It's really pleasant to drink out of. It's really beautiful. And then this one tapers out and flares a little bit. This will cool off your beverage just a little more, just because that opens up the belly of the mug to the atmosphere a little bit, and makes it so your drink is cooled down faster and you can drink it more rapidly after it's been poured into your cup. Okay, so that's probably the basics of what you need on the aesthetics of a mug. And we are going to next talk about how to hand build a mug.